First of all, I want to start off by thanking the governor and his outstanding staff. For the governor to be here today lowers the anxiety level in the community of Corcoran and the people that I represent. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. The governor's been our ripple of hope, and his appearance today, like this water behind us, creates a current that is lowering the anxiety level in the community of Corcoran, because people know that the governor is aware. He shows that he cares by being here, and we look forward to working together to get past the challenging times that we have ahead of us. And so again, thank you, Governor. Appreciate you. And please welcome a good friend of mine, a fellow county supervisor out of Tulare County, Mr. Supervisor Eddie Valera.
Thank you, Supervisor Richard Valle. Today, we stand between two counties, yet united with one heart and a message for the Central Valley. That message is, help is here. I repeat, help is here. The disaster recovery through FEMA, with support from Cal OES, has resources readily available to help you through the heartaches and the headaches. That center is located in Farmersville, California, with mobile units making their way around the region. I want to thank Governor for his visit to the Central Valley and surveying the damage caused by several rounds of atmospheric floods. Supervisor Valle from Kings County, as mentioned, and I reached out to his office a few weeks ago, and thus we appreciate him being here today. Tulare and Kings counties have been greatly impacted, inundated, and strained. Yes, people are tired, homes are gutted, and lands are unharvestable. The livelihoods of many are at stake. The inevitable snowmelt is making its way to the valley floor. The view behind me is just a glimpse of what is anticipated in the months ahead. Yet together, we continue to work on long-lasting measures that will help our counties press onward. Already the hardships to Tulare County are severe, but I am hopeful that we will see light because of it. To date, the following is an abbreviated list of the impacts. Over 50 breaches to our canals, 200 personnel were assigned from agencies across the state, 642 affected homes, with 37 completely destroyed. 500,000 tons of sandbags delivered to 12 stations throughout Tulare County. As to roads and bridge damage, just to name a few, 250 locations impacted by the storm. Two major highways, Highway 99 and 198, diverted during the first round of floods. 13 damaged and destroyed bridges. Total estimate, $40.9 million. Approximately 9,163 people were affected by evacuations. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the partner agencies, volunteers, and county crews that put boots on the ground in the midst of this disaster. The state and county will continue to assess the situation and send resources to communities as needed. As we move forward from this experience, I want to thank the support of federal and state partners, our governor, Governor Gavin Newsom, who notice our plight and want to see a better tomorrow for all of us. We appreciate you and we thank you. Hoy estamos entre dos condados, pero unidos con un solo corazón. Y un mensaje para el Valle Central. El mensaje es: la ayuda está aquí. El Centro de Recuperación por Desastre a través de FEMA, con el apoyo de Cal OES, tienen recursos disponibles para ayudar. Y esta ubicación es en Farmersville, California. Y con asistencia por teléfono llamando 800-621-3362. Quiero agradecer al gobernador por su visita esta tarde, el supervisor Valle del condado de Kings y yo nos comunicamos hace semanas y apreciamos su presencia. Gracias, Governor Newsom.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla Namath. I'm the director of the California Department of Water Resources. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I want to start by acknowledging the incredible comments of both our county supervisors here and acknowledging the very challenging winter so many communities down here in the Central Valley have had. I came down to Tulare County in the middle of March to get a better look at the enormously difficult conditions with atmospheric rivers pushing on our very saturated soils and resulting, as you heard, in 50 different levee breaks and lots of crucial kinds of flood fighting to keep people and property out of harm. We are now into the next phase of the winter of 2023 storm event and flood emergency, and that is planning for an historic snowmelt season. We are here in the Tulare lake bed because, as we all are acutely aware, all of that snowmelt without interruption ends up right here. And the work that we have to do together with a state and federal local partnership is to identify the ways in which we can be sure that we are diverting as much water in advance of it ever arriving at the lake bed, putting that water underground, making sure that we are getting that water away from the communities that populate the Central Valley and that make up the Central Valley workforce. The one way we will be successful is if state, federal, and local governments form a very strong partnership, establish plans, communicate those plans with the public to keep them safe as the snow starts to melt over the course of the next 16 weeks. The Department of Water Resources is here with our partners at Kern County, Tulare County, Kings County, and Fresno County, providing technical assistance, providing advice as to accessing very important flood fight materials should that need arise, and doing everything we can to put in advanced defensive measures to divert flood flows, again, from people and communities here in the valley. So I'm very grateful for my colleagues at the Army Corps of Engineers that are with us here locally, also with us in Sacramento, and I'm very grateful for the emerging partnerships that the department is forming with the 4 counties that make up the Tulare Basin. We have a lot of work to do together. Today is a message of industriousness, of rolling up our sleeves, of identifying the solutions and acting on those solutions so that all of our communities can feel safe. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Nancy Ward, Director of Cal OES. Nancy.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you all for joining us here today. And I, too, want to thank both supervisors for not only being here today, but their leadership, our partnership in these last couple of months that started, as Carla said, with the atmospheric river rain that started the flooding, and now as we transition into what could be a very, very challenging snow melt. Due to the quick action of Governor Newsom to quickly declare a state of emergency and request a federal declaration from President Biden, we've been here since early March, again, working with each of the counties for the rain events and now transitioning to emergency protective measures that will help us as this snowmelt heads this way. We are here. We've been here. There are several hundred Cal OES, FEMA folks here, DWR, all in partnership with these 4 counties to ensure that we are supporting them in the needs that they have throughout this challenging time over probably what could be the next 16 weeks. So with that, I'm very proud to introduce Governor Gavin Newsom.
Thank you. Thank you, supervisors, both of you, for all your leadership and support, stewardship, and your invitation to visit with you and visit the communities directly impacted by not only the flooding that exists today, but the flooding we're anticipating over the course of the next number of months. Look, it goes without saying this has been a challenging number of months here in the state of California. I was joking with the Biden administration. I mean, the last call they want to hear from is anyone from the state of California. I mean, been out here, President himself on numerous occasions visiting impacted communities associated with these 13 atmospheric rivers. Went from the extreme drought, where we extended the drought proclamation in late November, early December in some parts of the state, and just weeks later, that first atmospheric river, and of course, these major floods. As a consequence, we've moved our operations from drought and issues related to safe drinking water, which remains top of mind, and emergency and situational responses related to the drought, to emergency and situational responses associated with this major flooding. What is, I think, significant for people that are not here in this part of the state is that you can look at a scene like this and think the worst is going to recede, that the worst is behind us, when in fact, quite the contrary. Every day you're seeing incremental half-inch and inch of more water, new water present itself here in this basin. And as a consequence, we not only need to maintain our vigilance, but we can't be impatient in terms of the impending floods and the damage that will occur here in a very short order. So we're here with that mindset. At 3 o'clock today, our teams are meeting with local leaders as it relates to the specific issue of the Corcoran levee. I know there have been a lot of questions about costs, about scale, scope of that project, different points of view, different opinions, so many different points of view, so many different opinions that we are convening with the groups from both counties and a lot of local leaders to get everybody on the same page. I can assure you being on the same page with regard to local decision makers is important, but also getting on the same page with legislative leaders and our federal partners as well in a concurrent manner. We're blessed to have a major disaster declaration from President Biden, and we can thank the president directly for that, as he was directly involved in providing that assistance. As you know, Kings was brought into the major disaster fold on the 14th of this month, and the significance of that is the individual assistance that's provided, the legal assistance that's provided, the household and food assistance that's provided under that major disaster declaration. We have here folks very familiar to you, from Joaquin to Karen Ross, who also are assessing the needs of the community, particularly farmers, not just farm workers. More on that in a moment from the farm workers' perspective, but obviously impacted farms like this, making sure that they're correctly assessing the damage. And it's so important, the inputs in terms of damage assessment, numeric assessments, so that we're making sure that when the applications go in, that we can be helpful and supportive in terms of many different federal access points, in terms of loans, in terms of emergency support. And we're obviously deeply involved in terms of our different state agencies and helping support those efforts. But most importantly, we recognize the impact this has had on real people. We were just down in Corcoran, walking Main Street of Corcoran, met with the mayor and others, supervisor, reminding us of those being impacted. A small business we just visited that says business is already down because farm workers can't afford a beer after work. Others are concerned about what's coming in the next few weeks. People here, quite literally, that we're living just stone's throw away. You see the house underwater, houses that will likely be underwater in a matter of months, being dislocated and being impacted. Concern about what happens even after the peak of the stormwater runoff, or rather the snowpack runoff in July or so, and what kind of permanent damage possibly could happen as it relates to displaced workers, displaced dreams. And so we're cognizant of all of that. We're here for the long haul, not just to address some of the situational concerns as it relates to this particular levee or that particular levee. All of us are mindful of the impacts of neglect. All of us are mindful of the impacts of delay. And so there is a sense of urgency you've heard represented by the speakers just a moment ago. I will say I'm very proud of some of the work that's been done to date. I don't want to oversell it. because I imagine many folks are sitting there saying, well, what about this? What about that? I get that. That's why we're here taking, trust me, copious notes. But there have been some projects that, inspired new leadership in terms of those points of CAL FIRE is out there building roads. I didn't, trust me, CAL FIRE doesn't build roads necessarily. Unless they're in the middle of the damn forest and they're making way to address related issues associated with vegetation management or issues related to emergency response. But they've done a remarkable job, and we'll be opening up a significant road access point later in the week that we visited. We were in Allensworth and elsewhere, mining communities that we have their back as well, those that often are overlooked, and making sure that their voices are heard as it relates to emergency preparedness and emergency response. We always do, and I know you're all familiar with this, particularly in this part of the state. We do after-action reports, and we're very humble in terms of trying to learn from areas of weakness. Usually that comes down to simple things like communication, lack thereof, different personalities. And so we're in the process of making sure we address those issues in real time. Sometimes that's as easy as sharing cell phone numbers. Other times that means changing protocols and expectations from, locks on gates that don't need to be locked the next time there's a disaster, to issues of why there's a gate there in the first place. And so all those are issues that we've been trying to work through over the course of the last few hours and over the course certainly of the last few months. Final point, not only gratitude to Joe and his team at CAL FIRE and Nancy Ward and the great work that Office of Emergency Service does, but also DWR and Carla and her team that have been on the ground here over the course of the last few weeks, convening meetings and understanding the complexity, particularly the complexity of these four counties. Tulare, Kings, and obviously Kern and Fresno, as you know, are not part of the Central Valley Flood Project. We can discuss that at another time, the whys of that, the component parts of the merits and demerits of that. And so there's different protocols, different rules of engagement, and finger pointing that often is the case. And at the end of the day, you don't care about that, and I care to put that behind us. And when we're dealing with the realities of people's lives, businesses, as I said, dreams being impacted, people want to know what to do, not who's to blame. And we'll have plenty of time to figure out more systemic strategies to make sure we're not back in these positions where people are looking for, strategies and support that otherwise could have been preordained and predetermined in terms of protocols that could have been well established in advance. And that's on all of us. And I think that's certainly part of a recognition and a reconciliation that will come in real time. So again, we recognize what's at stake, the levee. We recognize the impacts on the prisons. We recognize the prospects of displacement, property damage. We recognize the slow-moving nature of this. We recognize the temperatures are significantly increasing in real time. And with currently 320, at least in this portion of the Sierras, 320% snowpack above average at this current moment, we recognize the magnitude of what will be coming our way over the course of the next few months. And I'll close just with one nuance point that's always important. It's not just the high temperatures, it's the higher low temperatures that are particular concerns. You're not getting the extra freeze at night, which is prophylactic in terms of the runoff during the day. And so we are mindful of that, and data collection, real-time monitoring, and distribution of information is clearly critical as we navigate the next few months collaboratively and collectively. With that, all of us are here to answer any questions you may have.
Governor, you mentioned on farm workers.
Yes.
How is the state going to address the need of farm workers who are going to be displaced in the next, or even right now they're being displaced because of that?
As you know, California is one of the few, if not the only state, that provides philanthropic supports at scale in terms of farm workers that do not have documentation or are otherwise unable to access federal programs. There is, for mixed status family, FEMA supports that are provided, and it's important we communicate that for people in mixed status families. That's number one. Number two, we have a rapid response fund through the Department of Social Services that we stood up in partnership with philanthropy that provides support, and that's also important to communicate the availability of those resources. We have Disaster CalFresh, which people are afforded regardless of immigration status. Farm workers can get emergency CalFresh and food assistance. As I said, there are other supports, counseling and legal services that the state provides, again, regardless of your status. We have a number of websites, culturally competent websites, as well as outreach workers through a program called Listos that knocks on people's doors, works with community-based organizations to provide that support and assistance, meeting people where they are. I will encourage people that are curious about eligibility and availability of resources, both at the federal level, state level, local level, and then hyper-local level as it relates to community partners, to go to one of two websites, perhaps both, depending. And that's cdss.ca.gov, cdss.ca.gov, as well as disasterassistance.gov. Both of those sites, again, not everyone has access to the tools of technology. And that's why we have programs like Listos on the ground, boots on the ground, knocking on doors in partnership with other community-based organizations to reach out to impacted communities, farm worker communities, and the like.
So do you have an idea how many farm workers may be affected?
That assessment's happening in real time, and that number changes pretty dramatically. And Supervisor, thank you for sharing the data you have. But obviously the impacts of this are not yet felt. I mean, this is analogous, isn't it, to climate change? You know, you think there and says, well, just an inch a day, you don't even notice. And all of a sudden, you're that frog boiling in the water and wondering, what the hell did we do? We didn't take it as seriously as we need to. This is for me, a surreal experience. I mean it. I've been to a lot of disasters as governor, perhaps more than most governors in the last few years. And honestly, when I'm in a place like this, it's usually, again, with the worst behind us in the rearview mirror, when in fact, where we're standing likely will be underwater in a matter of weeks, if not months. And so that's very sobering in every way, shape, or form. And that's why, again, that assessment is in real time and organic and will only be more significantly impacted. Obviously, those numbers will be of people more significantly impacted over the course of the next few months.
Governor, you've just touched on this there. But I'm wondering, Governor, you've been touring drought zones, wildfire zones, and last year you're now touring flooding zones. How much of this unfolding disaster is due to climate change?
I mean, look, I think we can be, particularly members of my tribe, can be a little hyperbolic at times, saying every weather experience is climate change, and we tend to overstate that. I mean, we've had in the past pineapple expresses, we've had cyclone bombs, we've had atmospheric rivers. Most multi-year droughts ended with major flooding events. You look at that historically, that happens to be true. But there's not a climate expert, there's not a meteorologist that doesn't say the following: we've never seen this at this level of intensity and extreme. And that's what is exacerbating the conditions that we're experiencing today. Look, this is a reminder. Mother Nature, I say it all the time, she bats last, she bats 1,000. She's chemistry, biology, and physics. We tried to, this was everywhere we're standing, this is history. And its history is being remade in Mother Nature's image, not man-made. Now, we're contributing to that through man-made climate crisis as it relates to greenhouse gases that are extending more extreme weather, extreme heat, extreme wets. As it relates to the wets getting a lot wetter and dries getting a lot drier. And this is what everyone predicted, and we're all experiencing it. And so it's sobering. And again, it's not politics. Forget your ideology. You got to believe your own set of eyes. It doesn't matter if you voted for Trump or you're going to vote for Biden, a red or blue team. Wake up to the extreme weather, extreme heat, extreme circumstances around the globe. But California's the tip of the spear of the climate reality. We're also the tip of the spear in addressing the resilience that is required, and I couldn't be more proud of that. But this is well defined, this lake, in our history books. And in 1950, we had similar flooding. 1983, we had a version of this. It took about 2 years for this lake to drain, and that's 2 years too long for the owner of this property. And that's why I say we're going to be here for the long haul.
Do you wonder what has to happen for people to believe in climate change?
I just visit California. Visit California. I started in this position as a transition as lieutenant governor to governor with President Trump. in paradise. You know, I never said anything like that in my lifetime. First year I was in office, we had a pretty good fire season, and then two of the worst in history, 2019 and 20. Last year, or 2021, last year was pretty mild. So we've had two mild, two extreme. 3 years of drought, 3 years of the wettest weeks we've ever had. I mean, again, one extreme to the next, weather whiplash. And that reality is just a constant reality here in the state of California.
Can you give us any more detail about how you're going to deal with this water and the water that's yet to come? Is the state going to fortify the levee?
Well, we're doing our best to help support that. We're assessing exactly the rules of engagement. They're not well established here, as you know. Different ownership structures, different expectation. You can't just raise one portion of a levee without considering the impact in another portion. There are unintended consequences. So this requires cross-jurisdictional engagement, county to county, city to city, so many different boards, so many different administrators, so many different points of view, so many people saying, you pay for it, I benefit. And we're assessing all that. I just want people protected and property protected. And we'll do what we can to intervene as appropriate, but quite literally in real time. There's work being done by the Army Corps, you can see right there. And in real time, there's work being done behind the scenes to assess what needs to be done over the course of the next few weeks.
So who does get to decide where this water?
Well, that's a different question depending on where we are upstream as it relates to the impacts. I mean, these are multiple counties. You know, supervisors say, well, hold on, Governor, it's nice, but, you know, we want your support, but you're not the supervisor. And the water folks here and the owners of it's complicated. It's why I kind of am a little more romantic for a collaborative framework. The Second Valley Flood Plan offers that platform. It's a little stubborn for me, but it is what it is. These counties chose not to engage in that. That's different. But those partners that have engaged in it have received significant money from the state, and we have a different engagement of platform of answering that question in real time. Here we're working through that, and I hope when this is done, we can fix that. And I'll certainly be a little more aggressive in expressing my point of view in that space as well. But it's not just on flood protection. It's across a myriad of issues. You know, we've been out here a lot in the Central Valley. I don't think there's ever been a governor spend more time in the Central Valley on a myriad of issues. Crime and violence. Crime capital of California is Kern County. Murder capital of California, Kern County. We need support. You need help. I'm not here to point fingers. Some folks, that's the only thing they're doing. You know, you got folks out here representing you that want to cut programs, cut the support for programs to solve this. Literally, they're actually actively working to stop money coming into the district they represent. There's one well-known elected official who's doing that. I mean, that's up to you to reconcile. I don't know why he keeps getting reelected. And then quite literally engages in working against your interests in real time. I'm talking about next week voting to cut programs to address the critical needs of this community. We won't do that. We're not going to abandon the folks out here. I don't care where folks voted. I care about them and their families. They love their kids. I love my kids. We're all in this together.
Governor, there's a state prison complex just down the road from here.
Well known, sir. Been many times. Yes, I'm aware.
What plans, if any, are underway for a potential evacuation?
Let's try to avoid that, but the CDCR is well versed and let me just highlight that in this context with evacuation procedures. Having experience with these extreme weather events and these extreme wildfires, we've had a number of scenarios within the CDCR of evacuation protocols. So I'm intimately familiar with those protocols. We're taken very seriously, and they're well established. We're trying to mitigate the prospects of that happening. We can't guarantee that at this stage. So we're preparing for a worst case, but we're doing everything we can to mitigate that, and that's quite literally the meaning of 3 is substantively addressing the direct cause and effect of that particular Corcoran levee in that respect, and one other levee in particular that's being discussed today.
Have you guys stopped taking prisoners at Corcoran temporarily?
Yeah, let me get the latest from CDCR on that.
An additional question, you were talking about some of the hoops you have to jump through in order to make things happen, to work collaboratively, but what can you tell the residents here who have to continue to wake up to this and continue to face this? What tangibly can they expect from you?
What we're doing. We're meeting with folks. We're meeting people where they are. I mentioned that as an aside. That was the 5th thing I said. in terms of the work we're doing, been working through and doing. But there's no clear cut when it comes to different counties. Many parts, one body. And so, that's father cause. That's what the Bible teaches us. One part suffers, we all suffer. So I tell the folks in the community, they matter, we care. And I know they don't care who's responsible. They just want folks to feel a sense of accountability. And we're here with that mindset of accountability.
We also know some lawmakers are calling on you to dedicate $100 million to the San Joaquin River floodplain restoration and another $100 million to provide disaster relief. Do you have a comment on that?
There was some letter that was sent. I'll take a look at it. Yeah, we have $8.6 billion we put up in the last 3 years, unprecedented across the spectrum to address the issue of water infrastructure, conveyance, issues related to water recycling, groundwater replenishment, issues around stormwater capture. I know quite literally since I've been governor, $738 million has been set aside specifically for flood protection, $738, which is unprecedented general fund money, primarily, not exclusively. As it relates to that, I know we put up significant money this year in the January budget. I know there was a particular budget allocation of $40 million that went into a trigger that's going to be addressed in the May revise as it relates to the broader letter. Someone mentioned it to me this morning. I haven't had a chance to read about 100. And anytime something's 100, I question it. Why not 99.6 or 100.2? It sounds round. And when things are round, as a taxpayer, I always question the methodology in terms of the inputs. So I'm interested in, yes, protecting and preserving not just assets and people's lives, but also taxpayers' dollars as well, and making sure that we're not asking for something that otherwise isn't being plugged in or available already.
I have a question. The Corcoran levee today, I know there's some concerns within the city of erosion, and that's already starting, but they're expecting that water to be sitting on this for years. What was your reaction to seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's, look, I mean, it passes prologue, 2+ years. The impacts, and that was just 83, not the 1950 experience. And, I mean, this is you've got a landowner right behind you. You should be asking him this question. I mean, this is profound and existential. And I love, we were driving around with, I don't want to share names. He said, those are my babies. And I said, well, how many kids you have? He was talking about the pistachio trees. Right? Talking about his dad and granddad and talking about the house he had bought and they remodeled, and talking about who they bought it from generationally, connecting to the 1940s. I mean, this is life. This is what community is all about. It's deeper. There's a spiritual component when you're out here. It's not just about ag. It's not just about urban. It's not red and blue. It's none of that. It's life, man. It's generations. It really is. It's pride. And so, this is hard, and it goes to the spirit of a community, and you can't legislate your way out of that. There's no politics in that space. And so there's something, forgive me, organic that has to be established, and that organic thing is trust that, you do matter, and that it is important, that we're there for you. And I hope, that's really the purpose of this trip, is to understand, seek first to understand, but also, folks, I hope when they come away, to understand as well that we understand the needs of this community.
I'm not sure if this question is going to be for Ms. Ward or Ms.
Bring them both up there.
But Ms. Nemeth, you mentioned the prospect of trying to divert water before it gets to the lake basin. What are the mechanisms, and where would that water go?
Sure. Before I go to that, I just want to let you know that we are aware of the erosion. Both DWR and the Corps of Engineers, we've walked that levee. We share the concerns that the county has raised. They've requested materials to shore that up, muscle wall. We've deployed that, so that's happening. I think the question that the governor is referring to is, which is I think we're all hearing about in the media in more detail than has made it to the department yet, which is a desire to raise that levy. We take that request very seriously, but again, the department has not yet received specifics about what the county would like to do, and that's what we're meeting with them, because we recognize the timeliness of making that kind of decision and sorting through that issue, not just for Corcoran, but other requests in for the community of Stratford. On this issue of diverting water upstream, so if you'll just permit me, The governor was mentioning the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, and that really spans from the Sacramento Valley all the way down essentially to Fresno County. And that is a place where the department has responsibilities to put together we do an enormous amount of analysis on hydrology, climate, what we can anticipate for flood, and the status of levees. And we drill with our local partners on that all the time. That's one of the most drilled emergencies that we have in California because they don't come very often, so we have to kind of dust it off and keep doing it. Our big challenge is in these 4 counties, they are not part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, which means I know that there's a lot of information here in these counties about what happens to the water once the Corps releases it from the dams and before it gets to the lake bed. Otherwise, we'd have a lake emerging more frequently than we do. And so the real challenge is how do we collect that information and with the counties and have the counties make decisions about where to divert water upstream of the lake bed to protect communities further downstream. Flood as a general matter is a landscape scale. It is a regional challenge. It just screams regional coordination to make it actually work. One of the ways the department is focused on trying to divert water upstream is groundwater pumping. So the governor issued an executive order. I'm losing track of my months and disasters, but I think it was sometime in the late February.
Which executive order?
The streamlining of groundwater recharge. So one of the big signs that we had from lots of folks is confusion over did they need permits or not. So the governor made that very clear that when we're diverting floodwaters, you do not need permits from the Water Board or Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so many landowners and local water districts have used that streamline. We've been able to recharge about 50,000 acre feet of water. That's about 45 projects. But the feedback that we're getting now is that they're running short on equipment, pumps that can pump the water and get it onto and into fields for recharging. So the state is working with our partners and just yesterday worked with Fresno Irrigation District to get some pumps and siphons in the ground, diverting as much as we can. Now, groundwater, I don't want to give people the impression that that's going to be able to move enormous slugs of water that, are going to come down from the Sierra Nevada, but every piece helps. I mention that as an example of why tracking that and why the information about what's being diverted where is so crucial to public safety in this flood emergency. I cannot stress that enough, and I cannot stress enough that the Department of Water Resources, by virtue of, planning choices that were made a long time ago, we do not have significant information about these 4 counties and where water moves. That's why I said at the beginning of my remarks, we will not be successful unless we have a good state, federal, and local partnership. And that partnership needs to be communicating out to the public what the plan is. In Kern County, there's a lot of conversations underway with the Kern Water Master. Back in the early 1980s, one of the things that happened was the State Water Project. We have an intertie, and we moved water into the State Water Project and out of the area. As the governor mentioned, there's a lot of different requests that are made in the media but not made of the department. We are aware of that. We are preparing in the event that request comes in from Kern County. So there are significant things that we can do to make sure, as much water is diverted away from the lake bed as possible. I, for one, knowing how depleted groundwater basins, I would love to see as much of that snowpack get underground. It's an enormous opportunity for these communities to stabilize their groundwater basins. We don't have all the infrastructure in place, but it is certainly a lesson in how we can manage in the future in extremes. So those are some of the things that we're working on. And then in addition to pre-positioning significant resources, things like muscle wall and super sacks and these sorts of things where we can anticipate a need for flood fighting.
To what extent does subsidence here in the valley impact the ability to shove more water underground?
Well, it definitely does. So, some aquifers, when you overpump them, they collapse, and then you don't have the ability to sort of replenish and reinvigorate that aquifer. But, right now we're going to see, because water's going to go to the lowest point, so we will see in real time how much subsidence has changed since previous mapping was done. That's something that the department has been working on, the mapping of the lake bed to understand where that water is going to pool. So it certainly has an effect, no question. But in aquifers really surrounding the lake bed, there are enormous opportunities. There are things called paleo valleys that have been the subject of a lot of research and I think innovative ideas about how to manage these kinds of situations in this part of California.
To map these a little bit.
Yeah, so we've put in several $1 million to help map these paleo valleys. So these are ancient valleys that are coming out of the major Sierra Nevada watersheds. And DWR, through our groundwater management, has also been flying over the valley in these critically overdrafted groundwater basins to do aerial electromagnetic imaging. It's like an MRI, but for the earth. So we can measure about 1,000 feet down and do calculations off the resistance to understand what kind of soil types are, to map the areas that can actually take this recharge water. That's something we did not have in 2017, and it's something that is absolutely by virtue of having a groundwater management requirement in the state, and that's going to help us do that kind of diversion.
Are there any prospects for all this water that's already here? It may take up to 2 years to get rid of. Is there prospects for pumping that out somewhere and getting it out of the area?
I think eventually that is what will happen. Whatever cannot be diverted, we will have, in all likelihood, a degree of a standing lake. The Kings River, a significant portion of that is shunted off and goes down into the San Joaquin system. But past is prologue, and certainly with a snowmelt as extraordinary as this one, we can anticipate a need to pump out of the lake bed for many, many months to come, not just the next 16 weeks as the snowmelt's happening and then it's settling. And then I think we turn to a sort of the next phase in how we manage this situation is how do we evacuate the lake bed over time. It does depend somewhat on the hydrology next year. Folks are looking at an El Nino year. I like it for drought, a little less so for flooding, but that's going to help us understand the rate at which we could evacuate the water that settles into the lake bed.
Carla, speaking of snowmelt, it's supposed to be over 90 degrees here tomorrow.
Yeah.
Close to 100 by
Yeah.
the end of the week.
Yeah.
What does that
What does that do?
Should residents be concerned? What does that mean for the crews doing work on the levees right now?
Right.
Should there be any concern?
So there is enough space in the reservoirs to take the anticipated inflow. So I want to be clear about that. I know there's just a lot of concern when people see the weather coming. We calculate runoff numbers. We do aerial flyovers of the Sierra Nevada, so we are calculating the rate of snowmelt, we are calibrating against observed data, and we produce that information every week. That information goes to the counties every week, and obviously it takes several days for that snowmelt to, make it down. So that's the rhythm we start to get into, which is here's the runoff numbers. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? How does that affect your neighbors? Let's run some simulations to figure out where the counties might want to put that water and what resources they're going to need to guide it there. So that's how it's going to start to work. But for right now, irrespective of these warm temperatures this week, those reservoirs operated by the Corps, they've been sort of we call it digging a hole in a reservoir to be prepared for that snowmelt, and we anticipate that will accommodate the inflow. But it means, it's coming down. So it means every, opportunity where we don't have these high flows coming through, we need to be doing work on the levees. We need to be making decisions about where that water's going to go. And when I say we, just to be clear, it really is the counties that need to direct that. DWR can assist. And one of the ways, we really do need to assist is with good information, hydraulic modeling, inundation mapping, and those sorts of things to help the counties.
Yeah, and I had one more question.
Yeah.
Have you learned any lessons from the flood responses in Pajaro and Planada earlier this year? Has the state's response to floods evolved in any way through this crazy year we're having?
Yeah, well, unfortunately for Pajaro, I think that was on our radar as a problem area for a while, which was a low-income community that, could never meet the requirements of the Corps of Engineers around cost-benefit analysis. And, those words come out of my mouth and they just sound awful and dated because it's awful and dated because oftentimes the communities that are most vulnerable to flooding are low-income communities, and it becomes this sort of vicious cycle because they cannot, they don't have the resources to raise, for their cost share. So we certainly learned a lot in Pajaro, and we did have this past year, the governor signed legislation to allow the state to step in and take that cost share for the Pajaro community. We have been advocating the federal government, because the Corps is so important in all of these decisions about where those resources go, that they need to be factoring in two things: low-income communities and climate extremes and that variability. So we're going to keep pushing on that. That will have an effect on places like Planada, where we saw that very intense flooding, a very similar situation. In that area, the Corps needs to step forward and do a feasibility study to establish the sets of projects that will be needed to avoid that scenario from developing in the future, in the next flood, which will occur.
But the importance of the state absorbing that cost share is significant. Also, I know significant as it relates to the work we're doing with the federal administration. We highlighted those communities disproportionately in terms of being a priority of understanding, a deeper understanding of how FEMA addresses their assessments as it relates to emergency declarations, as it relates to major disaster declarations, meaning there's a threshold before you actually can reach it. And we are making the point, particularly in these low-income communities, they're likely never to reach it, but the impacts are devastating. And so, having visited both those communities, I can only assure you, for me, that is top of mind in terms of our agenda with our partners at FEMA. Anything else, guys?
Governor, can you confirm that Kings County is eligible for individual assistance and disaster complex?
Since, yes, I can confirm that. Yes, cdss.ca.gov. I mean, it's a great. I actually took a look at it. At least I can say this: on your smartphone, it looks great. It's easy to access. Simple, basic information, asks and answers the questions around who's eligible, who's not, and points out local partners as well. It's a great resource.
When was that added?
It's been up for some time now. And again, what was added specifically to the major disaster declaration was Kings on April 14th. The original disaster deck was April 3rd. We were able to get Kings in the fold on the 14th, which was very important.
And for the individual, when they were added to the individual file?
The individual on the major disaster declaration affords the individual assistance, so that triggered the individual assistance. But again, still issues with people without documentation, and that's where we're trying to do our best to supplement.
That people should not start applying for FEMA early this week.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's again, I can't impress upon you more the quality of the information to ask that answer the Q&A components of our site that can answer questions people have. But remember, that it's a state portal, a lot of local programs. Federal eligibility is always the most restrictive, and that's the burden as it relates to FEMA. And there's creative ways on Disaster CalFresh that provide support. Regardless, but a lot of other restrictions exist and persist. That's a deeper question. You're talking to the wrong guy when it comes to this, because we're the only state in America, because we made sure of it, regardless of your immigration status, your ability to pay pre-existing conditions, that has universal health care. It's a point of pride. It's a point of privilege being your governor to be able to do that. But that's an example of an area where we've done some good work, but the federal government continues to neglect a lot of hard workers and a lot of families out here that you know better than anybody else that I think should be considered in terms of federal support. I'll end my federal diatribe on that. With that, we thank you all very much for being out here.
have them apply as soon as possible.
And yeah, don't deny
No,
that.
don't
Apply
wait.
regardless.
And
Yeah.
don't-
They just kind of start
Yes.
applying
Absolutely.
in Kings County.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
don't wait.
No.
Okay.
And that's since April 14th. They're eligible.
All right.
Yeah. No, that's bad information. I mean, thank you for offering that. Push back. Thanks, everybody.